let's get ready to hop in and check out the exclusive interview that Force got with some of the devs over at Blizzard's Diablo team, and let's look at this together and see what sort of news and information is there.
Hey, you know what? This week I got a chance to sit down with Blizzard, with the devs of Diablo 4, and talk a bit about the game. They held this event, inviting myself and a few others out to New York. Look, I gotta be honest here. When I was first...
Hey, invite me to New York. I don't have anything else to do. Fly me out. I'll come do it. Fuck, I'll drive to New York as long as you're going to meet with me and tell me cool stuff.
During which we discussed quite a lot about Diablo 4, the past betas, the upcoming release, some of their post-launch plans, some basic design philosophy behind the game. During this, I learned a bunch of new things that even surprised me a bit, so let's just jump into it. Here's what I learned sitting down and talking with Blizzard about Diablo 4. We discussed class balancing quite a bit. Specifically, we were talking about the Necromancer, how in the open betas they felt super strong, both just their base kit, but also, of course, that corpse explosion legendary that was just like running around full speed, invulnerable, blowing up massive groups of things. It was really crazy. But then when the server slam came out, at least initially, the class felt quite a bit undertuned. Of this, Rod said, one of the challenges of people making decisions around the classes when they only have access to the first 20 levels is there's so much going on inside the tree. Like there's a node that gives you % health for your skeletal warriors and mages. There's a lot you can do to buff all of that stuff.
All right, so I'm going to jump in here, and I'm not going to make this video super long, but we've talked about this numerous times. Like, bitching about buffs and nerfs until we have access to the whole game is a waste of everybody's fucking time, right? The other thing that I do want to point out here is that sort of Blizzard and the Diablo team get to stop sort of making excuses because they're the ones that decided to release these betas with such low caps and then took feedback and made changes only to come back and remind people that they didn't have access to the full suite. I think it would have been better from the rip to not take any feedback on class balancing because nobody had access to everything. So this is one of those situations where I kind of feel like they did it to themselves. And the conversations that we keep having are only because they fucking hurt themselves. I just want to point that out. You know what I mean? I just kind of feel like that had to be said. Pizza is so good. What kind of pizza?
So, of course, once we unlock the Paragon boards and then any buffs we get via gear. As we've talked about before, it is true that class balance and like how they stack up against each other at levels 10, 20, 30, 40, etc. isn't really all that important in the grand scheme of things, since for most people, the amount of time spent at those levels will be relatively low compared to the amount of time spent at the end game, which is basically levels 50 plus. Now, even acknowledging that classes will feel incomplete when they are incomplete, as in they don't have the maxed out skill tree, the Paragon board, and a fully complete gear setup, I do still think it's important for the disparity to not feel too large between the classes in the process leading up to that, the time we'll be spending in endgame.
So I'm going to jump in here. I don't really care that there's a disparity between how all the classes feel. And if one class feels stronger than another in the beginning of the game, it's just going to happen, right? Like, that's a thing that happens. The important part isn't that there's parity between all classes at the beginning of the game, because the end game really matters. It's that the game feels fun through all stages of the game. And that's the thing that our community over on YouTube has been discussing when I make videos like this, is it doesn't really matter. As long as the game is fun, the game should not be unfun until you get to the end game. And I think that should mainly be the focus here, is not creating parity between all classes, but making sure that the classes feel good at all stages of gameplay.
We spent some time discussing the dungeon changes, saying in particular that they felt much better to explore and engage with during the server slam compared to how things were designed in the open beta. Now, while we were talking about this, Rod chimed in specifically saying that they tried to focus on the ones that are going to become nightmare dungeons as well, and that's really good to know, as this gives us an idea of which dungeons to expect nightmare variants.
Two things here. One, it's good that they're mainly going to change the ones that are going to be in the nightmare rotation. Right? That's a positive. That's the ones they should focus on. Two, these 4 content creators now have, well, all content creators, but these guys now have a good idea of which sort of dungeons are going to be the nightmare dungeons, so they can start making content around that. which I guess will be helpful for them. But I mean, honestly, if there's 150 dungeons, you don't need to redo all 150 if for the first season we're only going to spend time in 30 of them. So makes sense.
We do know that the game has level scaling, of course, but I was curious if, for example, say everything in the desert region, is it set to a minimum level that if you tried going there at, say, level 5, it would be too high and too difficult? His response was, there's a mixture, certain things that are scaled down and certain things that are static. For example, the capstone dungeons. The bosses are at a specific level and they stay at that level, so that if you fail, you can go away, level up, come back, and try again. The bosses will not continue to scale with you. This was new information, at least information that I didn't know, and means that basically they're going to be a few different ways you could approach capstone dungeons. You could try to complete them early while you are under leveled or even equal level if you feel like your build is powerful enough, if you're skilled enough, and you want to take on the capstone dungeon and progress into the next world tier faster.
And we talked about a lot of this in our video on level scaling, which I'll have linked up above if you want to check out the video on level scaling.
Or if you're struggling, if you're uncertain, or say if you're playing on hardcore, you can just go out there, continue to grind, and out-level the dungeon, since the boss will not keep scaling up above a certain point. So basically, that means that these capstone dungeons can either be a skill check if you attempt them under-leveled and underpowered, or they could just be a gear...
See, I don't know how, because it's my understanding, and I could be wrong here, that the capstone dungeons have their boss level set at a specific level, right? So like level 50. Maybe you can gear up past level 50 on World Tier 2. Maybe you can, like, you can level up and Paragon up. So maybe you can sort of like out-level them. But I thought everything sort of like came to a hard stop until you cleared the capstone dungeon. You couldn't progress to Tier 3. You might be right, Kralik. Like, you might be able to, but you won't be able to get any of the Tier 3 drops, right? So you could maybe get to like level 55 or level 60 in Tier 1, Tier 2, but you just can't switch over to Tier 3. That might actually be the way it works. So you could over level it in that sense, and that's probably what hardcore players will have to do, right? Just to be safe.
You keep leveling, gearing up, and powering up, and I think this is probably a good way to approach it. It lets people who want to try to get it done early attempt to do so, and it lets people who want to make it not that difficult continue to power themselves up and then approach it when they feel they are ready. And Rod also talked a little bit...
Is anybody, like, I feel like prior to Season 1, I feel like they're going to overtune the capstone dungeons. Like, I think they're going to be hard, hopefully. But I have a feeling they're going to be hard, and then they're going to get nerfed going into Season 1, Season 2, just to allow like the broader player base to be able to approach them in more of a reasonable sense.
Bit about level scaling after that, going at some length about this ongoing debate around the mechanics.
I bet they do. If they're overtuned and they're tough, I bet they get nerfed. I bet people can just out-level them, but they're going to look at like a time versus investment, right? So if they say your average gamer needs to be level 55 or 60 to clear it, your average, couch gamer, and then that's hard stopping them from going into World Tier 3, which they should be able to do at 50, then they'll end up nerfing it to where you should be able to clear it by like 47 at the easiest. They may tune it a bit. I think it'll get tuned, but only if they overtune it. And I feel like they should overtune it to give people a challenge in the beginning, but that's pure speculation, right? And they're getting ready to talk about level scaling, which is something that I talked about in my level scaling video, how I feel about it. So again, if you guys want to know exactly how I feel about level scaling, definitely check out the video from before.
Some people don't like scaling, but the problem when you don't have scaling is you end up with the traditional MMO problem, which is, oh, this forest area is where the level 1 rats are. Once I'm beyond that, I can never go in that forest again. With the open world that we have, we wanted it to be so that you could always go somewhere and have an adventure. He, of course, didn't literally mean you can never go back to the level 1 rat area in an MMO or any game that doesn't have level scaling.
No, he definitely meant, like, if you are at level 20 and you go to a place with level 1 rats, your character will instantly die and be deleted. That's exactly what Rod meant.
but more so that it probably wasn't worth going back to that area in these particular scenarios. But with the level scaling that they're having, they're trying to provide this incentive so that it's always worthwhile, no matter if you're going back to the prologue area or not. The mobs will still present a challenge, but maybe more importantly, they're still going to have a chance to drop loot that will make them worth your time.
So I'm not going to jump really too far into level scaling, but I do want to talk about it. I don't really much like level scaling because I do miss sort of the old way games worked, where this was this zone. You had to be this strong to enter, and you had to be this strong to clear it. And then after that, you could move on and do other things because it gave you a sense of power and progression. I think level scaling, what it does, because it brings everything up to you, it sort of like prohibits some of that feeling of the power fantasy, because everything always comes up to your level, so you constantly feel like you're pushing against the wall nonstop. And I also think that it's a way for devs to kind of be able to reuse assets and things like that, and not sort of have to continue to create different challenging endeavors for you, because they say, well, we've created this world, we don't want any of it to become obsolete. So instead of giving you new mechanics and new zones and new things to explore, they say, well, everything is relevant. Everything's relevant, so you can go do anything. And the problem is you've already done all of these anythings, and they're not new and exciting anymore. But instead of making new exciting things and new exciting events and new exciting mechanics, they're just like, well, just go do the old shit. We've got tons of this old shit you can do. And you're like, well, I don't want to do the old shit. I've been doing the old shit for a year. I don't want to do it anymore.
And he actually went on to say, so even when you...
That's like my shorthand on how I feel about level scaling.
Played the Server Slam, you could go back to Nevesk, which is the prologue area, and still fight monsters that are your level. And you should, because honestly, when I think about my through line through the game, part of what I had to look at was what are the dungeons that have the right aspects for the Codex of Power. Of the 3 dungeons that are right around Nevesk, one of them was the class agnostic dungeon that gives you a bubble. And here he was referring to the aspect of the Protector, which came from the Lost Archives dungeon, and this is the one that grants you that damage absorbing barrier whenever you hit an elite. He continued saying, to me, the first thing I'm going to do is go down to that dungeon and get that aspect, so when I get a yellow, I can turn it into a legendary and have that bubble. And that's like part of the conversation.
Right. But what that does, right, is that gives you, like, you could take that aspect and make it a very top tier aspect and be like, you actually get this from the Act 4 zone, because this is such a top tier aspect and it's going to change your gameplay immensely. And you could go with like lower tier aspects and go from lower tier to higher tier and where you find them. But the way they do it now, they can just haphazardly sprinkle them around. And then it's just about how much time it takes for you to walk and go get that aspect, because all of the dungeons scale to you. And I think what this is going to do, unfortunately for them, is what they don't want, which is that it's going to make shit completely obsolete, because you can go find the 4 or 5 or 6 best aspects right away. And all you got to do is walk to them or teleport to them or whatever and get them. And then you have all of these, the non-rare aspects, right? Like the dungeon aspects. You can get them whenever you want. Yes, this is good for gameplay and for people who just want to run through and grab all the best things and go through whatever they sort of theory crafted and do all that. But it's bad for the gameplay loop that they just said they wanted to create, which was to make everything new and exciting every time you do it. It would have been better for them to put lower tier aspects in lower tier dungeons. That way you would go get them and then you would use them, and you would use those lower tier aspects. And then as your character gained strength and progressed, you got access to the higher tier dungeons within the sort of campaign acts. And then you would get those and you'd be like, God, I can't wait till I get to level 35 so I can go get the bubble. Instead of being like, fuck, I just finished the prologue, time to run over and get the bubble before I do anything so I can put this bubble on at level 5 and put it on my rare and run that rare till I hit level 40. Because the legendary aspect is going to take you so much further than any of the gear will from level 5 to level 15. And you can go do it at level 1 because everything's going to be super fucking easy, right? All you have to do is walk your ass over there. So I think this kind of counteracts all the stuff that they just said they wanted to do. Also, I'd like to just play devil's advocate. So there are people going to be like, well, there's nothing wrong with what you just said. That's the best way to play the game. It's the most optimal. I get it. I'm just trying to always look at it from the other side of the coin. And you got stomped, geared up a little bit, and knocked it out. And maybe that's just going to be depending on your character and stuff, right? Like, because I think most of us aren't going to play over tier 1 just because it's not going to make sense to play tier 1 through the campaign. Anything over tier 1 through the campaign with some of the information that's came out. And I was doing just fine in dungeons and everything else on my rogue at like level 5. Like it wasn't a challenge at all. As long as I had more than just my basic attack, I did just fine and I could stomp through whatever I needed to. Now maybe I just got lucky. But you know, in the early aspects and stuff, there's no problem to how many times you die. Like, so you can do them as many times as you want and die as many times as you want. But I do see your point. But in theory, like, the dungeon should be just as challenging at level 5 as it is at level 15 because it should be scaled to your level. And then it's just going to be gear dependent.
Your level. Level scaling is always going to be a hot debate in these games. Personally, I have no issue with the system, and I think if it's implemented properly, it can really be worth it because, yes, it does give you incentive to use up all of the entirety of the play space to go back to those old areas and not have parts of the world that are basically just dead content. But that really comes down to how exactly it is implemented and if it's done right. It has seemed like some of the biggest complaints with how level scaling works.
And I mean, and I don't want to keep going into this, but even like the dungeons, right? Like, so once you get to like mid-end game, you're only going to be playing the dungeons that are the nightmare dungeons. So all the other dungeons are going to become dead space anyway. Like, there are a lot of things where I understand where level scaling works, but then you create other avenues for people to do things, and it makes level scaling not worth it.
Works in Diablo 4 are A, the perception and reality maybe that leveling makes you weaker against the enemies that you're fighting up until you level up your gear. You know, the fact
a lot of what you'll do will be the open world stuff for sure. And it's going to be like bounties and stuff, and nobody wants them to take longer. Like, I don't want my bounties to take longer. I just want to blow through them.
The fact that you levels the monster, and if your gear stays the same, you in turn feel weaker or are weaker. And B, that lower level characters at points seemed stronger than higher level characters because of how the calculations were done.
I don't think you'll ever get it to be balanced with two different characters. Like a level 5 and a level 50 playing side by side, you're never going to get it to balance outright. Because you're either going to make the experience too easy for the level 5 or too hard for the level 50. Because of just the way things tweak out. So trying to find parity between like a level 30 and a level 45 fighting side by side with gear and all these different sort of advantages and disadvantages is just never going to happen. The lower level is always going to have an easier time because there are less variables in their equation. And then the higher levels are going to have a harder time. And if you try to close the gap, it's going to make for a worse experience for one of the two.
On them to get it right, whether accurate or just perceived.
But I mean, honestly, you're probably not going to be fighting like level 50s with level 5s very often, so the huge disparities should disappear over time.
Issues with the level scaling in the game. Next up, we talked a bit about the legendary aspects. Now, Rod mentioned that one of his favorite things in playing Diablo 4 is when you find a new legendary and it opens up new ways to play and to try new builds, and then being able to adjust your build based off of that, which this, of course, brings up the idea of respecking. One of the biggest debated issues with the game is the cost of respecking, if respecking should be expensive and prohibitive, or if it should be basically free and somewhere in between. Later, speaking with Rod, I actually asked him exactly about that. And I referenced the fact that Blizzard mentioned quite recently as the last developer livestream that they would be doing balancing throughout each season to prevent one spec or class from becoming so powerful it is the default. Here's a scenario, right? We're in the middle of a season. During the season, I've been spending all my skill points.
So he's going to talk about mid-season balance patches here, which is something we've discussed in several videos. But this is something we've talked about before: is how are mid-season balance patches going to affect the game and affect people's builds and theory crafts, especially if you don't have a lot of time to play. Thank you, Escalator. And how it's going to affect people who might only have 3 hours a week to play if now they've got to completely scratch their build because of a nerf.
Investing in my Paragon board and finding and leveling up gear and doing all this stuff for a specific build. Let's say it's a firewall build on my sorceress, right? I've been doing this. We're halfway through the season. Blizzard's like, that's a bit too strong. we are gonna nerf Firewall. So I asked him if such a thing happens where one of my build mid-seasons gets nerfed into the ground, would Blizzard be willing to offer free respecs at the point? And Rod's response was possibly. It's one of those never say never things, and we'll be having those conversations, I'm sure, at some point. You know, I should add though, he more or less went on to say that it's not going to be nearly as bad as people are perceiving it to be. The respec costing isn't going to be nearly as bad.
So I wanted to let him talk there. The concern about respec has never been for those people who are going to be at the end game and going to have all this extra gold. It's for the guy or girl that is playing 3 hours a week and just got their build fucking neutered. That's who the concern has always been for, which is going to be your average player. It's not going to be for somebody like me or a content creator or a grinder. And I like that they say that it's not going to be as bad as everybody thinks. But I would rather think it's going to be worse than it is, because that at least keeps a conversation going. I don't know why. Like, I know why they don't want to respec for free, but I definitely think that there's definitely going to be a conversation about it. Get free, that could be maybe free respecs through the season pass, maybe. Yeah, Crowley, that fucking sound alert is hilarious.
Things here that we talked about. We were discussing the Ashava fight. Rod was saying that during the fight he was playing as a druid and he was using this wolves and vines build, and he just wasn't sure how well he was doing. Now, I also brought up having played a sorceress firewall build and thinking the same thing, like, how am I doing? Is my damage any good? How does it stack up to the other builds and the other players in my instance? And at that point I asked him, were they considering like end of event ranking screens?
They
like,
need
say
to.
for post a boss fight, could I see how my overall damage compared to everyone else that was also fighting
Exactly.
the boss? He said that mail has been sent. You know how like in Marvel Ultimate Alliance, you can go in with 4 players, do a mission, and at the end it says, the best Avenger is Captain America. That's what I want. I just want to know if the build's working or not.
And I think that's a great idea. I think it should be very, very involved. Not crazy involved, but I think it should just show like a list of all the classes and a list of how much damage everybody did. And that way you could tell if you're doing better or not. Even on like final bosses where it just pops up. Or, you know, if people don't want it to break their immersion, just have a little button where you could like hit tab and then it pops up or something. You could even have a percentage of damage. I think percentage of damage would be the easiest. I would prefer to see an actual hard number because then I can gauge. Do you know what I mean? Because knowing that like another rogue did 40% of the damage and I followed up with 20%, is helpful, but for me, definitely it would be like, okay, I did 1 million damage. Next time I did the fight, I did 1.4 million. What did I change? You know what I mean? But even a percent is better than nothing. Just in the beginning. I know it's going to create like a toxic environment, but everything creates a toxic environment, and if you can't deal with a little bit of toxicity in video games, then you probably have no business playing. Like, if you can't deal with the internet, then you need to get the fuck off of it, because like nobody gives a shit about your feelings on the internet.
Tell if I was helping or not. So it definitely seems like this sort of thing is on their mind. Specifically, it's something that Rod would like to have in the game. Later on, he mentioned, I think as we get further in, you know, we talked about leaderboards, we talked about post-action briefings, we talked about things like
target dummies need to exist. Target dummies need to exist. I don't know why they don't have them in. They cannot be that fucking hard to add. Literally cannot be that hard to add. Targeting dummies need to be in the game the day it launches. I don't give a shit. Add a target dummy. It will take you 5 seconds. Literally, all it needs to be is something with unlimited health, with unlimited regen. You can set them at like every 10 levels interval. With like, it doesn't even matter what their armor is, because like, you just need to know how much of a difference in damage your skills are doing without having to fucking theory craft and spreadsheet it. Because that helps bring your game in line for more casuals. Scaling one and a boss one, yeah, you could do it either way. Like, even if it had no armor and it was just literally so you could see the difference in your numbers, that helps the more casual player that doesn't have a spreadsheet to tell them exactly what's happening, because they can put it on and go, did this make a change? Yes. Okay, I want to use it. You know what I mean? Would I like to see one that's like a boss and it scales off of your level? Absolutely. Like a boss, like regular monster, elite, champ, world boss, and like just those 4 would be great. And the spreadsheet isn't always right. No, it's not. And That's why all I need to know is just how much damage I'm doing. At least you can spot problems. Exactly.
I love this idea. I mean, I brought it up. I asked him about it because I would love something like that. I know that there can be some issues with the game design side of things where some developers don't want to put up like end of action briefings. You know, you finish a boss and show where you stacked up because they don't want to make people at the bottom feel bad. I don't
fuck people at the bottom. If you cannot, like, I get it. You feel bad. You had a bad run or whatever. Like, just use it to learn from. I'm tired of, like, I'm getting to the point, and maybe I'm just getting to be older. I'm getting to the point that I'm tired of caring about everybody's fucking feelings to the point that it's detrimental to other things. Okay, so you want me to worry about your feelings in a video game because you performed poorly? No, I want to know how well I did. This is a very reasonable ask. It doesn't matter how it makes other people feel bad. You know what I mean? Each individual. No, I get it. And there's definitely a lot of different ways. I'm just to the point as a gamer and as an adult where I'm just tired of caring about everybody's fucking feelings every minute of every day. Do you know what I mean? Like, at some point you just get tired of just constantly walking on eggshells. Tell me where the video game hurts you. Exactly. Point on this game cartridge to where the video game hurts you.
Who are making their own builds, being able to test it out to see really how effective it is and how it stacks up to other people. That's personally something that I would love to see. Speaking of leaderboards, we asked about them because as you probably heard not too long ago, they've said that they are going to do leaderboards, but they won't be in season 1 and may very likely not be in season 2. We asked why this was the case, and Rod said, it's the implementation of them. One of the things is we don't want to rush them because we know a lot of people care about leaderboards. Where do I stand? What's the best build? We just need to put a lot more effort into the design of them. I would say if I were a betting person, probably season 3.
Okay, so you fucked up the leaderboard season 1 and they're all wrong. They get reset. Like just put them in, and then if they get fucked up, they get fucked up. You just reset them. Like, it doesn't matter. I don't know why they didn't put the leaderboards in. I'm sure it's a technical reason. Or it could be about hurting people's feelings again.
All right, next we spoke a bit about D4 as a live service game, how Blizzard is approaching development of the live game, and how they're designing and working on upcoming seasons. Rod said that as with every live service game, they're always working on what's on the horizon. He mentioned that while they'll move quickly to fix any major issues, game-breaking bugs, huge imbalances, etc., smaller things may likely get pushed out further down the road to later seasons because they've got multiple teams working on these things simultaneously. In fact,
I mean, that's pretty normal for live service games. I actually watched a thing here recently. I think it was Astacross, and he was talking about an interview they had with Mercules on Destiny 2. And they talked about sort of an index they use where they said, hey, this is sort of how we tell how important a bug is and when we decide to sort of like act on it and in what order. So like if it's game breaking, we act on it instantly. If it's like a big bug, but like the usage rate of people like exploiting the bug isn't above a certain percent, even though it seems like a big deal, they don't work on it. And they sort of develop like index systems and index points to determine during the live part of the game what they work on faster and what they work on slower, right? So something that affects like a larger group of the player base, even though it might have less direct impact or might not be as important as something that really is jarring to the game, because it affects so many people, that's where they'll put their like resources, right? And I'd say that Diablo 4 is going to have a very similar system. I don't know, guys, but let me know what you think. There was definitely a lot of information in here. I've definitely edited this video down a little bit just because it was very long. And there's going to be some stuff in here that was redundant and then we don't need to talk about. There was some new information. You guys definitely got to hear my feelings on it. But let me know what you guys think about the newest information down in the comments below. If you're still excited for Diablo 4's release and what you're sort of expecting with the launch. And if you learned anything new from this video, and as always, have a great day.